This afternoon's public lecture is in replacement of a workshop. We were to have a workshop from Thomas Ripple, Cultureland in Germany. He unfortunately cancelled on Friday. He's in hospital with a stomach bug, and so we had to reshuffle. And I immediately emailed Judith, and she immediately replied, saying no problem, I can speak earlier, so that was very nice. So thanks, Judith, for being so flexible. Just before I ask Sean and to introduce Judith, I'd just like to thank Joe Larragate. Joe, do you want to just put your hand up and say hello to people? Joe is from Maynooth Green Campus. Maynooth Green Campus have been a big supporter of the food sovereignty effort on campus, and so I'd like to really say thanks to Joe for that. Joe, do you want to just tell people who are not from campus what Maynooth Green Campus is?
Yeah, well, Maynooth Green Campus is a cross-campus initiative of staff, students, and also the local community on promoting sustainable practices and climate justice through local action on the campus. We work on energy, waste, water, biodiversity. We're a grassroots organisation ourselves, and travel and transport and climate justice, which is a big theme, which is really a connecting theme for a lot of what we do. And we were awarded the Green Flag last year for our work across all of these themes. So we've done well to achieve the Green Flag across all of the themes. And what's been really exciting is the extent of citizenship and engagement by people outside of their sort of normal working hours, but actually increasingly bringing what was peripheral into the mainstream. And we're seeing this now across all of the disciplines, even in the social sciences. People are becoming more and more aware of the centrality of the environment, and this is really going to be a permanent theme in the 21st century for us. So initiatives like the food sovereignty work that Alistair is doing here are really branching out and developing this work and taking ownership of this agenda. And it's just a really very exciting time at the minute, all of the new things that are happening here. So it's just a pleasure to be along. And once again, Alistair, well done on your second year of, or is it the third?
It's the third year. It's the third
year of the
2 more years then it's sabbatical. So.
Counting the days.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Maynooth University Social Science Institute also very kindly supported the public lecture specifically, so I'd like to thank them and acknowledge them for their support. No, come on in.
Look, if we bumped into each other.
Yes, very good. You brought a crowd, fantastic, that's what we want. We should have sold tickets. Let's have a round of applause for that. There's more! Definitely.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I will ask Sean now to introduce Judith, and then I'll see you in a little while, okay?
Just first of all, I'd like to thank Alistair as well, once again, for organising this event. I think the mixture of music and spoken word and debate and discussion really works well. So, just a few things to say by way of introduction to Judith. I think that we do seem to be at a crossroads in Irish agriculture in many ways at the moment. It seems like there's two stories in some ways. We have the old story, which is that Ireland, is primarily cattle economy versus agriculture, green and pleasant land. These kind of things just go back a long time. And an increasingly intensified version of that agriculture, particularly since we joined the European Union. So agriculture now is a kind of it's a sort of a cattle economy in steroids, you could say. We share similar problems with New Zealand in some ways in that respect. And that kind of story is the one that's been pushed by all kinds of interests really for a long time now. From the Department of Agriculture to Chagas, to the IFA. It's really the consensus, I think, in this country. But that story is increasingly starting to wear thin, I think, and starting to show its age and to show that it's maybe not fit for the realities of the 21st century. So I think what's really valuable for people like myself and Roisin and Nathan and various other people who are involved in the community-supported agriculture sector, if you want to call it that, what's valuable I think for us is that there is an alternative, there's another story, and that neoliberal mantra of there being no alternative is just simply not true. We know that other kinds of agriculture can work, other types of agriculture that are geared towards building communities, that are geared towards supporting biodiversity, towards protecting soil structures, towards developing local connections and local economies, solidarity economies. All of these kinds of things are there. And I like a phrase, a term that an American, the late American eco-socialist Joe Covell uses. He talks about CSA specifically as a form of prefigurative praxis. Okay, in other words, a model for a new type of doing business, a new type of society, a new type of agriculture in this case. So it's been really valuable for us to have Judith and the other people in Urgenci to kind of guide us, to put down the structure internationally of CSAs, that we can feel like we're part of it, we can receive guidance and information and resources from it. And even though CSAs at the moment are quite small, there's about between 6 and 8 or thereabouts in the country, it's a drop in the ocean when you think about the amount of the size of the other conventional agricultural sector, really. But at the same time, it's a start, and it's hopefully the start of something bigger. So I'd really like to thank Judith for coming over and coming home. Actually, she's been away from Ireland, living in Paris for the last 45 years, but keeping her connections going all that time. Building on the food sovereignty movement through Urgenci, through developing policy with the United Nations, through a range of other groups internationally. So I hope you give her a big round of applause, and I look forward to her talk.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, does anybody here know where community-supported agriculture originated? Because it's not that new, so I just give you that as an introduction. In the 60s, 1960s, 1970s, in Japan, people were falling ill. They were falling ill with a disease called Minamata. Minamata, which was actually caused by mercury poisoning from the soil, from the industrialization. And some Japanese housewives, together with the founder members of the Japanese Organic Association, who were really the Japanese hippies of the day, founded the direct from producer to consumer Feikei, which means food with the face of the farmer on it. And these housewives then knew that the food was safe, wasn't polluted, was organic, and was not going to kill their children. So that is where the whole movement comes from. It then spread to the States and to Europe, more or less at the same time, around the turn of the century. And now Urgenci is a network of networks, and we have networks all around the world, and we are about 3 million people in the national networks, and our role is to support them. It's also to work with the other food sovereignty movements on policy. So what I'm going to try and talk about today, now I haven't rehearsed anything, I've put a few slides together, is really what the issues are and what the governance system is. Now this, where's the first slide? Oh, there it is. Okay, so can you see, what can you see here on this picture? Bottles of tomato passata. Now, this is the story of Enike, a Romanian farmer who I met 2 years ago, and she told me about how their whole crop of tomatoes had suffered the most appalling hail damage due to climate change. Now, what does your average farmer do? Just sit down and cry. But what Enneke and her husband did was they turned all of those tomatoes, the entire crop, into tomato passata, which then went into their community-supported agriculture shares throughout the winter. So they did not lose the fruit of their labour. Now, climate change is the elephant in the room, and people are talking about it, but the actual reality in terms of governance at global level, in terms of what we really need to do, is not something people are prepared to contemplate. It does mean a lot of radical change. It does mean that we need to be able to take something, adapt, and make sure that we are still feeding ourselves. To do that, we need to work from the bottom up, which is what CSA is doing, but we also need a radical, transformative change in legislation to change our lives in our developed societies very, very considerably. So what is the conundrum here? We have traditional diets that are part of our current cultural heritage and linked to food sovereignty. And on the other hand, the food systems have all become linked to the governance of the global food system and agriculture. Everything has been commodified. Seeds are commodified. Inputs, in other words, the chemical fertilizers, and the food that is grown far from where people live. Most people, when they do their weekly shop, they do it in supermarkets, and an awful lot of what they buy has already been processed. It includes a lot of very unhealthy aspects, and we are looking at serious health issues all around the world. We're also looking at a situation where poverty is increasing around the world, food insecurity is increasing around the world, as is obesity. So all of these things are part of the conundrum. If you look at some of the developing countries, they never had issues of obesity, of heart disease, of diabetes. But now people are drinking sugary drinks, eating high-fat processed foods, and the health impacts are huge. I mean, here in Ireland, the number of overweight and obese children is scary. Same with the adults. I mean, there are very serious things that are going wrong with our industrial system. So we really have to make our choices, and we have to make them now. What kind of a food system do we want? Do we want this kind of a food system? This is a picture taken somewhere in the Midwest in North America, where the land is now no longer able to produce or grow anything. Or do we want something like this? This is a photo taken on a community farm in Germany. And the farm is a member of Solavi, which is our Solidarische Landwirtschaft, the German CSA network that is our member there, who I may be talking about a bit more later on. So do we want to relate and reconnect with our local food systems? I mean, these are things we touched on very strongly this morning, I think, in the meeting, but not everybody was there. And the other issue is that the industrial food system is leading to a hell of a lot of very unsafe food today. There's the horse meat scandal, which is why this picture. There are other issues. I mean, one of the things I find very worrying now is the trade discussions between the United States and the UK, and the risk of chlorinated chicken entering our food chain. The whole fear, and it's a very genuine and a real fear that people are not talking about in public, of the jump of some strange disease that we may not yet know about from animals that are raised in factory farms to human beings. And half the human population could even be wiped out. The WHO has this on their radar, and they're very carefully not talking about it. But the danger of that comes from feeding animals in factory farms with antibiotics, with fungicides, and there is now human antibiotic resistance and human fungicide resistance that is a direct result of the industrial food system. So those of us in social movements, the Via Campesina, ourselves, the fishers and many others, fight industrial agriculture and the stranglehold it has on our food system in Rome through the civil society mechanism, which at least one member in the room knows well, because we meet there at least once a year, but also in other UN fora. So and when I say we fight it, it means working on policy. It means working on the global governance systems. But it is not an easy road. God knows it's not, because we have this awful situation globally where the concentration of wealth is such that we are under gagging orders. Quite literally. I had the honor last week to participate in a United Nations expert group on SDG 8, which is on decent work and sustainable growth. And I can tell you it was one of the toughest weeks I've had in my life, because there was a room full of men in suits upholding the neoliberal system facing me. And because it was held under Chatham House rules, I can't give you any exact feedback of my input. But when you have on one hand maintaining the status quo of the 1% and pushing for a redistributive, solidarity-based world, it's not an easy ride, people, I can tell you. I leave it to your imagination. So what is the global reality today? I mean, the global reality is 20 corporations that control the food chain. The three biggest own over 50% of the seeds. 4 corporations control 99% of the livestock breeding. 10 corporations control over half of the fertilizers. 4 traders control more than 75% of the grain and soy market. And 11 corporations control 30% of the food processing industry. I mean, that is scary. How, you know, you were talking about how difficult it is to actually get things up and running on the ground. This is what you're up against. Of course people don't love you. But at the same time, what we are doing is what people have been doing for thousands of years, which is feeding themselves. And feeding themselves with sustainable local food systems. Be it the fisheries question, be it through community-supported agriculture, or a multitude of other possibilities, like farmers working with co-ops, with farmers' shops, and so on. But in the big international treaties like the Convention on Biodiversity, the fight for open pollinated seeds is a fundamental struggle. So we work across the board again as social movements working together. It's not just Urgenci. We are a part of it. We represent the consumers as a UN constituency. So obviously, yes, we have the producers, but we work collectively, so there are millions of us. And so we can raise our voice collectively. Because it's only by coming together, working on the ground as you're doing things like Dee's doing with Shamrock Spring, doing all of the local things. We need to influence and have really strong advocacy policy with our local authorities, with our states, and with the international bodies, be it the EU or the United Nations. A few more figures for you. 1 in 10 people in the world is malnourished. Now, in a country like Ireland, it breaks my heart that there are about 15% of the population getting food aid. And that is true right across the European Union. And what kind of food are they getting from food aid? Which is another aspect. It's not what, the fact that they are, it's what kind of. So we're pushing as well and working with local authorities and local small-scale food producers to try and make sure that they're getting fresh local vegetables included. There are many community-supported agriculture groups that are working, accepting food stamps in the United States, for example. There are many CSAs that will accept local currency, like in Bristol. There are many different ways we can do it. And we need to write more, share more, and build more upon the different ways that we can resolve these issues. As I said, 30% of the global population is overweight, and about the same numbers are suffering from malnutrition. So that's 30 plus 30, 60. So it means there's just 40% of the world that are kind of on track, which is scary. It's less than half of us. In terms of some other statistics that are not up here, somebody said this morning, quite rightly, there are only 100 harvests left unless we regenerate the soil. The IPCC, the International Body on Climate, says that with the 1.5 degree centigrade target, we only have 10 years left. 10 years! Mm-hmm. The majority of people in this room are young. You're heading for the wall unless we all work together really fast. Really fast. And 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from industrial agriculture. 1 in 5 people can't afford 3 meals a day in the developed world. I'm based most of my time in France, even though I come from Dunmore East. And I know retired people who can only afford 1 meal a day. I got my pension 10 years ago, and I'm on less than €1,000 a month, plus 30 pence a week here in Ireland. I'm sorry it's laughable, but it isn't. It isn't funny. I mean, how do we live sustainably? Approximately 15% of the population, as I said, need food stamps. And yet 70% of our food is produced by small-scale food producers. Peasant agriculture is the answer right across the world. Now, how do we source it locally? I've mentioned CSA, which I will put at the top of the list, and I'll explain why in a minute. But there's farmers markets, there's allotments, there's community gardens, growing it yourself, local food crops, collective producers shops, solidarity shops and systems, and farm gate scales. The reason I put CSA at the top of that list is that the producer knows how much he or she needs to grow. There's no wastage. If a farmer is selling at the market, it means they have to bring stuff to the market, and the people who come might want salad, and you might have spinach, or they might want one thing, you'll have another. You'll end up bringing a whole load of it back home, and that won't necessarily contribute to financial viability, and it will also contribute to food loss and waste. So CSA is really, according to all the analysis we have done, and I'll show you a slide in a minute, the way in which there is the least food loss and waste, the greatest food justice, because the producer is paid what the producer says is their minimum, and people can pay a share that is variable or fixed. Now, there are many different ways of organizing the solidarity dimension of that. I don't know that I have time today to go into it, but certainly I'll be willing to share it with anybody afterwards. So,
I feel like there's one thing that's, one quite important thing that's missing off that last list, and that's been kind of absent from all of the discussion that we've had today, and that's the wild foods that are already things that we don't have to produce, that don't need us to own land, that don't need any input from us, the foods that are already there in abundance in the environment. Now obviously it's not a case of we can all go out and pick all the nettles and pick all the wild garlic and pick all the herbs, because then that will be depleted too. But I think they're a very important part of the food sovereignty discourse.
I totally agree. In particular, that part is carried by the indigenous peoples mainly in their discourse. I have been a forager all my life. I'm proud of it. You can dump me anywhere, I can usually find something to eat. And foraging is an essential part. Absolutely, and thank you for bringing it up. It's a whole different thing. I mean, I pick plants, I make jam from wild berries, I pick mushrooms, I catch shrimps and fish and various things. So I live a lot by foraging myself, so thank you for that. So in terms of methodology and farming methodology, the Via Campesina and Urgenci and other social movements have adopted agroecology as the fundamental response to industrial agriculture. The first meeting of food sovereignty was held, by the way, in Mali in Yeleni in 2007, and I'm proud to say I was there. The second major one was in 2015, which was the gathering on agroecology. And one of the chapters, you can look up the whole declaration online, but one of the chapters says, build local economies, promote local markets for local products, support the development of alternative financial infrastructure, institutions, mechanisms to support producers and consumers, reshape the food markets through new relationships of solidarity between producers and consumer, and develop links with the experience of solidarity economy and participatory guarantee systems where appropriate. Now, none of the things that I have mentioned in terms of the different options available to us can ultimately work without fundamental system change. We have to move away from the neoliberal capitalist system. And solidarity economy, which really was developed in the 1990s in Latin America, is a holistic response that covers all different aspects, and I'll show you that on the slide in a couple of minutes. So it comes back to, is it neoliberalism, or is it our systems, the grassroots owned systems with our outcomes? So historically, the stakeholder model is more participatory, but it can still just be green capitalism. And very much with the SDGs, for example, it is just greening capitalism. And unless we have system change, that wall is going to hit us very, very fast. Now, I know I'm being a bit revolutionary here, but I am. So the combination of solidarity economy and food sovereignty do represent that systemic change, and they are a part and a fundamental part of agroecology. And they have to include the economic paradigm. If you remove the economic paradigm change, you eviscerate it from its true meaning. Now, the capitalist model was based on the manager, the company board, and the profits for the shareholders. I think everybody knows about that. So we then started greening the economy and moved on to the so-called stakeholder model, where everybody gets consulted, and it's lovely and it's participatory. But you still have contract farming, you still have the marginalization of the poor, you still have all of the issues that we're talking about here. So solidarity economy and the commons is really a holistic answer to this. You have community land management with community land trusts. You have community energy management, with which Deirdre was talking about at lunchtime. You have community health management, finance with ethical banks and so on, community water management. A lot of cities are taking back control of the water systems, not like Irish Water. farmers remunicipalized their whole water system very successfully. It costs less, and the quality of the water is higher. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. And so on. And the question of seeds, food production and consumption management must remain within the community and in the hands of the producers. Seeds must remain within the farmers' hands. Now this morning, now that chicken was a huge big bird that had been running around the farm for some time. It had never seen the inside of anything except the hen house. And it was something that fed us for 2 days. And it was a treat. Whereas if you're getting a €2 chicken from whichever supermarket, without naming anyone in particular, it grew up in a battery. It was fed antibiotics so that it would grow faster. And it's not necessarily much more than a little bit of protein, a lot of water, and a lot of unhealthy inputs. So that is all corporate. There's a lot of corporate capture of the good work we're doing. On one hand, we should rejoice, because it means we're doing something right. Tesco's in the UK lost 15% of their fruit and vegetable turnover last year because of local, healthy food being produced by small-scale food producers and farmers. There's a lot of greenwashing, a lot of blue washing. We really nearly always need to ask ourselves, how does this change the system? Does it change the system, and how does it change the system? There's the compartmentalization of the system itself. I mean, if we're working on housing and the right to food, we also have the right to housing. Those are two different departments. How do you talk to each other? Within the UN, you have silos. Within the EU, you have silos. Now, we did a lot of work over a 2 or 3 year period with Olivier de Schutter, who is the ex-special rapporteur for the right to food and who leads IFES Food, on building at European level a common food policy plan. This was done across the board, working with different EU commissioners for health, for environment, for agriculture, and so on, and with all of the grassroots networks. There were food policy labs held in different cities and in Brussels. I mean, it was a huge 2-year framework. And then we had a big meeting in Brussels about 8 or 10 months ago to bring it all together. And this has now been launched. So if you look up the Common Food Policy Plan, it takes things into a non-compartmentalized vision of the food system. And it relocalizes it, and it provides a different entry point from agriculture as being the food system. It really takes health and nutrition and local food dynamics into account. So another challenge we have is working as social movements. It takes an awful lot of time to build consensus. You have to sit down and talk. And the system, the UN system, the EU or states, they want to go fast, fast, fast. So standing up to them and saying, no, we need another week to talk about this is not easy. Then there are the different processes. The Sustainable Development Goals, habitat-free, and post-2015 finance for development. How to get your hands on any of the money? Can you get your hands on any of the money? It's extremely difficult. I'd just like to mention in terms of the SDGs that I have been working maybe 30% of my time for the last few years also on the SDGs, trying to support the grassroots food movements in the UN processes, particularly through the New York process, which involves different inputs because they have clusters like the Food and Ag cluster, the Commons cluster, and it's much more difficult than in Rome, where civil society and social movements have great recognition for their work. In New York, they're really, who are you, looked down on, and it is not an easy place or an easy space. But social movements are starting to try and impact those spaces to change some of the indicators. We don't want sustainable growth. We don't want GDP to be a measurement. GDP doesn't translate into poverty reduction and social inclusion. It doesn't translate into respect of human rights or well-being or education or health for those who are in difficult situations. So, you know, we are starting, it's a difficult road. It's a really difficult road, but, you know, we don't have any time. People like myself and yourselves need to make a contribution at national level so that this comes from the grassroots up, and so that people like myself can work with you and then take this forward. And that's how we need to do it. I need input. If I speak in a meeting, I don't just make it up. I need this to come from my constituency, from all of you. We never make things up. It all has to feed into a process. So where and how is the food produced, and can consumers buy their food outside of the industrial system? Now, in a country like France, you have what we call multi-producer CSAs. A young couple can go to a pickup point and they can get pretty much all of their week's shopping done from the different producers who they have contacts with in one point. I'm talking with an organization in Senegal to try and do the same thing. Because why do people go to supermarkets? Because they don't have the time. Because it's handy, it's convenient. So we need to create the alternatives, like the solidarity producers shops, like the farmers markets, and like the multi-producer pickup points. What are the impacts of an increasingly urbanized society? Another part of our struggle, and that's where we're working a lot with municipalities, is to protect the green belts around the big cities of the world. If the green belts go, the food system goes. And a city like Barcelona has done a lot of work on this. Another example would be Bamako in Mali, where the local authorities are actively working to preserve the green belt. And then you have cities where the green belt has just been eaten up by the urban growth. And, you know, we have got wording into the new urban agenda on community land trusts, on protecting the green belt, but some municipalities just grossly override this, you know. But that is where part of the struggle takes us. So in terms of governance, what are the alternatives, and how does this all connect to the nutritional dimension? How can we move forward from cheap industrial food and poverty for farmers, farm workers, to decent livelihoods and healthy, nutritious food? Well, I think I've given you some of the answers already in what I've said. I mean, it's through the collectivization of our approach. Community-supported agriculture, basic self-governance of each CSA, the commitment to agroecology and local communities, minimal carbon footprint. I mean, I'm not going to give you all the technicalities of agroecology, but there's a lot of mulching and no plastic. It builds up soil health, it builds the water, it means you have access to nutritious, fresh, seasonal food. It is possible to work with local authorities. It includes sliding scale payments, and the networks exist at national and international level. And I mean, of course, at international level, my job is to ruffle a lot of feathers and do a lot of hypocrisy. So, you know, it gets quite technical. What is the farming risk, and how can consumers help? CSA means sharing the risks and the benefits. So you have the risk of poor weather. You may get a week or two with nothing in your basket, in your box. That's what you signed up for. Or you may get a huge amount of green beans or marrows, so you need to learn how to process them and do stuff like Enneke did with her tomatoes. The volatile price market, well, the fair prices are agreed up front. Unreliable markets. The consumers and the farmers plan the production, so it is co-production we're talking about. Poor health, lack of social protection. The consumers will step in and help work on the farm. You know, I have seen this happen, and it does work. Lack of capital. It needs to be included in the annual negotiation. That's what a lot of producers are very shy about doing. The German network is incredibly strong on doing that, and so are the Americans. We can learn a lot from them. Now, if I take SDG 12, which is responsible production and consumption, I led the working group in the civil society mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security on this, and we got some very good policy outcomes. Because the whole logic of responsible production and consumption, or consumption and production, is absolutely core to achieving some kind of impact on climate change as well. And a study that was carried out in Coventry University by a man by the name of Nigel Baker, who sadly passed away, but who gave me the body of his work to carry forward, shows that in a CSA, compared with a supermarket, in the total food supply chain, a CSA has 6.7% loss of waste. And that includes the parts of the plant or animal that you can't consume, compared with 55.2% in a supermarket. Part of that is because you know your farmer, you value your farmer. Well, John or Seamus grew this, so I can't disrespect it. I must eat it. If you know the person who grew what you have in your kitchen, you're going to eat it with the love it was grown with. But a huge amount of the food loss and waste occurs before the food gets to the supermarket as well, throughout the industrial food chain. So those are really significant figures. They're only one small comparison, but I think that they would be typical of most CSAs. More research needs to be done to validate this. So if you have somebody, yeah?
Sorry, can I just, from our experience at Derrybank Farm, one of the things that manages this is because the relationship is so direct between the producer and the eaters. So the farmer at Derrybank did notice that there was wastage, that she was harvesting things that weren't being collected or something. But then she was able to talk to the consumers and say, is it the collection day is wrong? Is it this is wrong? How can I change this? How can I, do you want self-harvesting? Do you want, so because of that direct relationship, the food waste can be cut.
Absolutely, and in one of the training manuals that the network has designed, one of the things that is emphasized is this need to discuss why something's going wrong. And you can do that because you have the direct contact between the producer and the consumer. So absolutely thanks, Roisin, for that. It is very, very significant. And I mean, it might be, you know, they grew nothing but Brussels sprouts. And you really don't like Brussels sprouts, so you can't eat them anymore. But I mean, you know, there are lots of things. But talking about things and interpersonal communication and problem solving will usually sort the things out fairly quickly. So we need to really work on the urban-rural regeneration of our relationships and the cooperation and solidarity partnerships. This is a farmer on a CSA farm in China, by the way, outside Beijing. Farm worker. He's not the owner of the farm. He's an agriculture worker. And I mean, his face says so much to me. So agroecology agroecology is based on traditional and local systems. I mean, there is no such thing as one size fits all in agroecology. What will work here will not necessarily work in the south of Italy, will not necessarily work in China or in Latin America. It is really using your traditional knowledge and certain principles and adapting them. And if you like, I've been talking about food sovereignty and solidarity economy, but agroecology pulls the two together. Now, after many years of long, hard, Bolshevik advocacy work, FAO has taken on an awful lot of our collective civil society asks, because, you know, we're hard and tough, but what we are working on is always based on our grassroots reality, knowledge. And one of the important things is one of the FAO's 5 strategic programs is now on agroecology. And they have built the 10 principles, or the 10 elements it is actually, of agroecology. So you can see what they are, and the question of values, governance, circular and solidarity economy. Now, circular economy to me only has significance in agriculture, because you can return things to the soil. Circular economy in industry does not have ultimate significance because it doesn't change the capitalist system. It's just recycling, but doing more of the same in a greener way. Whereas in agriculture, the circular economy means you can return something to the soil and regenerate the soil. So I don't object to it here, I normally would object to it. The other very strong thing is the co-creation and sharing of knowledge. I mean, I learned a lot this morning. We all learn, and we should continue to learn from each other. The whole idea of the green campus is also the co-creation and sharing of knowledge around nature and on the campus. It's a very deep concept, and I feel very honored to be here. So these are all the different principles of agroecology. To return just very quickly to the benefits to producers in CSA, their income, they know where the money is coming from, so they can relax a bit more and plan. They have a higher return because it's direct sales. They know they're meeting their local community's needs, they're reducing waste, and there is the possibility to agree to a differentiated pay scale with the consumers. I take 2 of my grandsons with me in my pocket wherever I go, because I spend 80% of my time on the road, and it's hard. Now, they were about 5 years younger when I took this picture, and I still take them with me. And it shows the importance of involving our children in the food system, in the growing, in the sharing, and in the distribution of the food. And I mean, what are they doing? Sam is having a ball playing shop. You know, he was about 8 or 9 years old there. That's the age where kids are still enjoying playing shop. Except he wasn't playing shop. He was so proud to be doing the weekly CSA distribution and weighing up the 5 leagues per person, you know. So it shows how we can transmit and transfer our knowledge of system change to the next generation, which is very important. The delivery methods will vary from one country to another, from one CSA to another. In China, they will actually deliver to people's homes. In Jordan, they put it out, people come and they take whatever, and they take whatever they need for the week. In most CSAs, it's a preordained amount of this and that and the other for the week. Sometimes it's the consumers who are responsible for preparing the share, and sometimes it's the producer. There's no one size fits all. Again, methods of payment can be variable. There can be a sliding scale weekly. You can have a share in an animal. On if you're not a vegetarian, if you want a pig or a cow, you can buy a share in a cow. And from the community point of view, obviously there you know where your food is coming from, so you know it's safe, you know it's nutritious, you know you can trust the producer. You're contributing to a very low carbon footprint at several levels. First of all, the farming method using agroecology will be very, very low footprint. The fact that it's local is also low, and the fact that it is virtually zero packaging, again, is very low. You're rebuilding your community, your economy, you're decommodifying food, and you're re-educating the community to food. I can tell you those two young fellows on that last photo are two of the most discriminating children I know when it comes to what's in their plate. And you can really break with the industrial and the agri-food system. So food systems are very highly complex. They involve natural resources, different producers, human settlements, governance, distribution, and consumption. So I tried to look at the governance system here a little bit. So who's responsible for land use? Well, it's the local council. Food policy councils, again, local authorities. Grants can be specific programs, EU, regional or local. National laws, European policy, and then international guidelines, generally not binding at UN level. To take it up to the UN level in terms of policy building, the UN was founded around the sort of overriding concept of human rights. Now, the presence of the private sector and corporations today is seriously undermining that. And it's a struggle for us to get human right to food into a policy document today. A serious struggle. Would you agree?
Yes, they talk about food security, not the right to food or adequate food, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it really is an increasing struggle protecting peasants and pastoralists' rights. Now, last December, and it's an absolutely huge thing, the Third Committee of the United Nations in New York voted on the Declaration of the Rights of Peasants and Other People Living in Rural Areas. Now, that is the most amazing document. It is the fruit of about 15 years of work by the Via Campesina. And I can only recommend you look at it and use it, because it is a very strong one. There's the other issue, which is the rights of small-scale fisheries. Now, Urgenci is currently starting to work with small-scale fishers very directly, because there is no global community-supported fisheries network, so we're doing that now. There's a big North American network. There are bits and pieces of CSFs all over Europe, so we're hopefully raising funding for mapping, capacity building, and empowering people on the fisheries aspects. There's protecting Indigenous people's rights, workers' rights, consumers' rights. Now, this all filters through the SDGs as well as through some of the specialised agencies like the Committee on Food Security and the FAO. So, I mean, what are we looking at today? We're looking at protecting our biodiversity. It took me 1 hour sitting with my wet bum in the grass to get this photograph. That is taken in my garden down in Dunmore. So, protecting seeds and biodiversity is a critical part. The biodiversity, of course, is cultivated biodiversity, but is also the wildlife biodiversity, which comes back to the foraging, and I wouldn't recommend you eat it either. It means protecting our water. And this photo is the snow melt, where I live in the Haute-Pyrénées in France, and as you can see, there are huge rushing, gushing water everywhere. So we need to protect our water from chemicals, from pollution, from fracking, from so many things, because without water we do not have life, and water is becoming increasingly scarce. The other constituency who we work with, of course, are the pastoralists, particularly in Urgenci's Mediterranean network, because pastoralists graze the land with their flocks of sheep and goats, which again protects it from the erosion, and it is an essential part of the food system. The indigenous peoples have more knowledge than all the universities of the world combined between them. They have all the answers we need to protect our environment and our food systems, and we work deeply with them and respect them within the social movements. Fishers, I mean, anybody who knows Dunmoreys will know I took this picture at home. There's two men I know down there in that boat going out to lift their lobster pots. Most of the small-scale fishers in Ireland have now lost their livelihoods because of the European legislation on quotas, transferable quotas, and industrial fisheries have the same impact on small-scale artisanal fishers as do the industrial, agricultural, animal producers or wheat or whatever. So consumers need to be empowered. They need to be aware of the food that they learn about in their primary schools, in their secondary schools, in their homes. This is a photo I took at the Beijing Farmers Market, which works back to back with the CSAs in Beijing. It's the same producers and the CSAs who run the Beijing Farmers Market. Because not everybody can or wants to sign up to a CSA, but the two complement each other. And again, climate change, that was this year. We had no snow. Normally we get snowfall in the Pyrenees beginning of December, November, beginning of December. And there wasn't a snowflake in sight until the first week in February. And we got 2 meters of snow dumped down in about 3 days. And that was a photo I took as soon as I could get back up the mountains to take a picture of it. You can see the amount of snow there is there. We have erratic weather systems. We get rain in countries when they shouldn't be getting rain. They're getting the rain when they shouldn't be getting it. When they should be getting it, they're not. You get more and more violent climate incidents like in Mozambique. Now people became aware of the humanitarian aspects of what happened in Mozambique. What has not been widely discussed is the entire livestock system has been wiped out. The crops were 2 weeks off their harvest, and the ground is too muddy to sow another crop, and there's only another week or 2 left to sow the next crop. So you're talking about huge humanitarian disasters. I mean, even Ireland got a hurricane out of nowhere that came straight up from Cape Verde, as opposed to across the Atlantic, and it did huge damage. I mean, I can see a lot of the trees that are still burnt down in Dunmore that will never recover. So climate change is, if there is one thing we need to work on, it is climate change. And from my perspective, relocalizing, reterritorializing, decommodifying the food system through a redistributive system is, from the food sovereignty point of view, the road to go. Am I running out of time?
Well, I'm worried that the students might need to go. I would like to have time for questions, and I would also like to mention somebody. So
you're worried about time?
Yeah.
Okay, so this
Short
is just,
answer.
I'll just fly through the rest, and I won't tell too many stories. So just to show you how complex it is with the silo system, you have all the different instruments and all the different UN entry points for the different aspects. We strategize collectively nutrition I've spoken about. The key concerns I have also spoken about. What is important is to build framework legislation. Over 30 countries now have framework legislation for social solidarity economy. That needs to be extended, and social movements need support policies for system change so that we can focus on a more participatory form of governance. Now, in Ireland, you have an excellent food policy council in Cork that Colin Sage has largely set up. That, to me, is part of the ingredients of the road you need to go. We have done a huge amount of good work in Rome on policies such as connecting smallholders to markets, collective civil society positions, all of us working together. And this is just a diagram showing how we in Urgenci are trying to visualize the different ways we interact and interface at European and global level to get there. So we have signed a memorandum of understanding with FAO. And ultimately, if we look at the whole lecture I've given, what does it look like? Well, it's a biodiverse bouquet of community-centered or scented flavors. And thank you.